what we're going to do. We're going to talk about why CO2. We're going to aquascape the tank. We're going to move the tank back where it belongs. We're going to start filling it. While we're filling it, we're going to talk about how to set up the CO2 hardware. So we're going to jump around a little bit, but while the tank's being filled up, we can take care of showing how to hook it up, how to measure, how to use the different items. And then we'll talk about adjusting it and questions and answers. All right, so CO2. Everybody hears the term CO2, CO2. What is CO2? Well, CO2 is a gas that makes up 78% of the Earth's atmosphere. And it is the gas that we expel when any animal breathes. We take in oxygen, which is O2, give off CO2. Plants, fortunately, take in CO2, create sugars via photosynthesis, which turns into energy, and they give off oxygen. Aquatic plants do that all the time. The only thing is that underwater, the concentration of CO2 is far less than it is in the air. So plants have had to adapt and work a little bit harder at growing and developing underwater. Some of the plants that we like a lot in the aquatic trade are very high light and high CO2. Why? Because these plants grow on the surfaces of rock on fast-moving streams. So they're technically getting water, but at the same time they're so close to agitated water conditions that they're picking up CO2 and they're picking up the most amount of light because they're not at the bottom 15 feet or 10 feet at the bottom of a lake or a river. And those plants have been the most difficult to keep in the tank. You buy them, they look great, you bring them home, and within 2-3 weeks they go boom, right? And then you say, these guys sold me a plant that's worthless. Well, no, the plant just needs proper taking care of. So the cycle is, with light, plants take in CO2, they break down the carbon out of the CO2, use it to create sugars, which is a complex carbohydrate, and release oxygen back into the water. And that's your photosynthesis cycle. So how do we replicate that at home? Well, we replicate it first by having sufficient light reaching the bottom of the tank to replicate those high light conditions. And this is why this is called a high light or high tech tank setup. For example, these two tanks, even though they look bright and well lit, they're actually low light. And low light is not measured by lux, like photographers measure it, or by lumens. It's actually measured by PAR. And PAR means photosynthesis active radiation. It's a special meter. We offer this for rent, by the way. And I actually put this on a yardstick so I can see how far in the water column am I reaching. And this will actually give us a reading. So for example, this low light tank at the substrate is pulling about 24, 27, depending on where I'm at, 30 PAR. That's perfect for a low to medium light tank. This has to pull, there's two lights that are going to go on this tank, by the way, but I have to pull somewhere around 50 to 60 PAR at the substrate. This is obviously going to be built up, and you're going to see this when I put it to the measuring. This is actually going to be, the substrate's going to be much higher than this, but that's what we use to measure and differentiate a low light from a high light tank. The other people who use this kit are people with reef tanks, because corals are part plant. They're part animal, part plant, and they also need photosynthesis active radiation, and that's why the lighting is so crucial to a proper reef tank. The next thing we need is excellent water flow. All planted tanks need great water flow, more important in a high light tank. These plants are used to being higher up in the water column. They're used to receiving more nutrients, more water flow. So so excellent water flow is a necessity. Most people doing a high light CO2 tank either will have a powerful hang-on filter or a powerful canister filter. And in our purposes, since I'm not going to use the lily pipes, I'm going to set my spray bar along the back here, so it's going to shoot the water forward, hit the front of the tank. This is the shortest distance. Create that turbulence, go here, and pick up and come across the plants this way. Normally, you would set it over here. They tell you in most tanks, but here the water flow is going to get lost. And so you want to create more of a flow and constantly refreshing and moving CO2 and nutrients through the leaves. Next thing we need, non-limiting nutrients. That means fertilizing your tank properly, daily or every other day or every couple of days, depending on your dosing. But you have to make sure that at any given time, you don't have any nutrients that are missing in the tank. Nitrogen, phosphorus, which is phosphate, potassium, trace elements like iron, boron, manganese, all those are important because they're found in fast-moving waters. Remember, streams that have a lot of current, that water is eroding rocks and soil and picking up those nutrients and dropping them to those fast-growing plants. You know, bog plants, you know, like cribs and all of those, they really need low light, slow water flow. They're adapted to that by nature. And lastly, you have to commit to a weekly water change. You know, weekly water change is great for your fish, but more importantly, when you're dosing a lot of nutrients, these plants, they're used to being in a high stream, water is not changing daily. So what do? You replicate that by changing its water every week. If time constraints, you can only do a 30%, that's fine. Ideally, 30 to 40 to 50% is great. If you go on a vacation and you got to skip a week, then you do a 50 before you go on vacation, you do another 50% when you get back. So, what are we going to use today? We're going to use HC. I can't remember the Latin name, but it's commonly known as baby tears. This is the plant that most aquarists struggle the most in growing in a high light tank. And I'm going to give you what the biggest pitfalls are for it. They are CO2 hog. That means that they will take almost all the available CO2 in your tank. They also are a nutrient hog. You need to have a proper substrate that has good nutrients for it, and you have to fertilize it. And they want their water change. Why? Because they grow very close to that stream of water going over the rocks. And so they're used to that conditions. You got to replicate it as best as you can. We're going to use Glosso, which is an easier to grow plant. Glosso really with moderate lighting, even with non-CO2, will grow if you add, say, something like Excel or carbon source. Brickia, which is that moss that everybody has to deal with, always floating up to the top. We're going to put a little spot of it, and that'll be to showcase the ceramic piece. I'm going to use dwarf hairgrass. And right now, the way this hairgrass looks is going to eventually change because the nurseries grow this hairgrass out of water. They grow it like sod. And so that leaf is going to change and become shorter and darker green over the next month or two as it starts saying, wait a minute, I'm not exposed to air, I need to change my leaf structure to be underwater. We're also going to use narrow leaf chain sword to accentuate certain areas. And it's a sword, but it's very short, and what I like is that the leaves are very narrow. They're not wide like, say, Sagittaria or something else. And I'm going to use it sporadically in certain spots to highlight it. And finally, I'm also going to use four-leaf clover. You know, should have been done in March, you know, St. Patrick's Day, then it would have been all appropriate. But four-leaf clover is a plant that's grown immersed out of water. Most of the leaves are going to turn brown and ugly, and then new leaves are going to form. And unfortunately, it's not going to look four-leaf. It's going to look more like a round leaf, but it does great at accentuating certain areas. Some people like using it as a ground cover. It's very tough once it grows. I like using it as an accent plant. And we're going to use petrified wood for the hardscape. By the way, this is what petrified wood looks like. And I bought these, and I bought additional ones for anybody who wants to get pieces of these. This particular style has less red in it and more silver and beige, and underwater it's going to look phenomenal, especially when you get some cherry shrimp, crystal shrimp growing all over the place, and that's the whole purpose of this. So we're going to start.